My name is Odessa Shannon. I grew up in Anacostia. I was born July 4th, 1928, and I was told that I interrupted a huge baseball game by being born on the 4th of July. Anacostia at that time was a beautiful place to grow up. What you hear about it now is not the place that I grew up. It was a black community where people looked after each other. The school and the church were the center of everything. If you did something at the bottom of the hill, your mother knew it before you got to the top. I lived in a cocoon, so I didn't know about discrimination and segregation because it was really a self-contained community. Then I went to elementary school in Anacostia, and at that time, elementary school went to 8th grade. So it wasn't until 9th grade that I left Anacostia as such, although my mother would take us places where we were, quote, allowed to go. But I never experienced any discrimination because she protected us from that, my sister and I. Then I went to high school, Dunbar High School, the old, most famous black high school in the country. What Dunbar did at that time, and this was long before civil rights, they had an arrangement with the Ivy League schools that one student from Dunbar could go to each one of those schools. And the student was identified in 9th grade. So in 9th grade, it was decided that I would go to Smith College. I had no choice in this, nothing. So I was groomed from the time I went to 9th grade straight through to go to Smith College. And until that time, I really didn't know any white people. I didn't know anybody except black people. No segregation. Well, yes, segregation, but not discrimination. So then I went to Smith, the only black student in my class. The first time I had left my cocoon. And when I came home the first semester, I said, I'm not going back. I don't want to go back. I was asked, I heard black people had tails. Do you have a tail? All sorts of things that a single black student in a white school went through back in the late 40s. I was told that I had to go back because I represented Dunbar. I was the one who went to Smith. And so I went back. And then I found out Dunbar had prepared me so well that I was smarter than, equal to, and not as smart as some of the other students there. And my self-confidence came back because I had self-confidence. Our teachers always told us, you've got to be twice as good in order to get ahead in this country. They always nurtured us. So I had self-confidence. It was broken down when I first went there, but it built back up. And so I graduated on Dean's List, and made friends. Somewhere even in my wedding. That's how close some of us became. I spent my junior year in Mexico. Had a wonderful time there, learned the language, which I wish I had kept up now, no, but I've forgotten a lot of it. Then I got married and went to work teaching in the Baltimore school system. And at that time, we're now talking 1950, once you became pregnant, you could only work for 3 months. You could not, quote, show in front of the children. And I taught 8th grade. After 3 months, I had to leave. But my husband and I didn't have any money. You know, I think I was making like $2,000 a year or something like that. So the Census Bureau decided to start the computer. I have a math background, and I said, I'm going to apply to the Census Bureau for a job. And I did, and I got it, which was surprising, really. So I worked in the Census Bureau, moving up the ranks. Fortunately, there were people there who took me along with them. As they moved up, I moved up. And again, in many instances, I've been the only black, the only woman, and those situations are stressful. But again, they strengthen you. I had been strengthened at Smith. I felt I could face anything, and I did have to face a lot, even during that period. But during that period, the interesting thing, and I think I mentioned it before, Jonas Salk was doing his experiments on polio, and he called the Census Bureau and asked if someone could come and do the final computer work for him. And I was sent to Pittsburgh to do that. And at that time, my son was about 5 or 6 months old, something like that. And I felt that that was my contribution to the world, to my children and to the world, is to work on this computer as a program analyst so that Dr. Salk could continue with his experience. Well, he was almost finished at that point with his experiment and help the world. Well, my children grew up in the Washington, D.C. schools, my children are 6 years apart. So
Wait, Washington, D.C. schools?
We lived in Washington by this time.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And he was about to enter junior high school. The elementary school I felt was fine. For the black community, education was the key to everything, the way out of everything, the way to have a good life, what have you. So he was about to enter junior high school, and I said, I hear that Montgomery County has this excellent school system, so I want to check it out. My husband and I agreed on that. So we came out here to look for a house. And we went to a house in Chevy Chase that looked very appealing. And as we walked up the driveway to the house, we saw the salesman climb out the back kitchen window so that he wouldn't have to talk to us. And we just kind of looked at each other and said, is this the way this county is? You know, it had a reputation for being liberal and what have you, but to climb out the kitchen window so that he wouldn't have to talk to us. So I told my husband, I'm not going to put my children through anything like that. So if we're going to move out here, which we wanted to do, I want to find a place where my children will be comfortable. They might have to face things in school, but when they come home, I want them to be happy and have a wonderful childhood. So we drove around and tried to find black communities, and we couldn't find them on the main streets, off any main street. So we finally asked and found out that we had to go off the main streets, back into the back roads to find the black communities. And I said, this is ridiculous. You know, why are we doing this? And then about that time, I heard about this area. And we drove over here. There were very few houses, mostly farms, really. And we heard that this street was being built. And that street, Partridge Drive, already had some black families. So the first person who moved on this street was a judge, black. I said, okay, if the first person who moves is black, the rest of them are going to be black too. So we bought the land and the house was built. And so my son enrolled in White Oak Junior High. My daughter, who at that time was 6, went to Page Elementary School. In the junior high school, and at that time I was working I had gone to EEOC. If you want me to back up to that, I'll tell you about that. But let's finish
with the school.
So one day my son came home and he said, well, I don't understand. My history teacher put up this big Confederate flag and said, the South shall rise again. What did he mean? Well, that was my first trip to the Board of Education. To say, what is going on here? You know, I'm not going to have my son subjected to this kind of thing. There weren't very many black students in this class either. All they did really was move the teacher. They never really addressed the issue. But it certainly, my red flags went up, and I kept track of everything that was going on from then on. And there were other things that happened. He was a star athlete when he went to Paint Branch, and he was a good track runner, but he also played basketball, football, and he was also a scholar. And they wanted him to run track in addition to playing basketball and football when he was a quarterback on the football team. That was another story. The coach had to take the entire team off to the side to let them fight it out, because this was the first class at Paint Branch, and there was a lot of tension, and Mark was a quarterback. But they also wanted him to run track, and he said, "I don't want to run track, that's just too much. You know, I've got basketball, football, and classes." And they told us that if he didn't run, told him if he didn't run track, they weren't going to let him play basketball and football. So I went to the Board of Education and said, you know, you are not doing this to my son. And of course, that was the end of that. He did not have to run track. And I began then to become more interested in what was going on in the school system. As I said, education is very important. And that's the reason I moved out here, because I have a lovely house in Washington. But the more I found out, the more I realized there were a lot of things going on out here in the county. The housing pattern developed so that most of the African Americans were put in the eastern part of the county. Supposedly that was because the land was cheaper to build housing, and so a lot of us ended up right over here. What that did was to give us a core of people who were extremely interested in education, in politics. There was absolutely no African American in any elected position. The school system had very few black teachers, and in fact, when they integrated the schools, all the black teachers were moved to the white schools, and then some of them lost their jobs. And it was interesting that the black schools were torn down. And even where the Board of Education is now, which was a black high school, the white parents didn't want their children to go to a black school. So they turned it into the Board of Education. So those were the kinds of things that were going on during that period. The issue of low expectations really was the problem. The kids, it seemed that once they hit, especially the boys, once they hit fourth grade, something happened. You know, they had white friends, what have you, up until the fourth grade. And in the fourth grade, and almost nationally, we found out this to be true. It's as if in the fourth grade, boys suddenly become men, and color becomes important, and racial features become important. And racism is so endemic in this country because of slavery that some people don't realize that they have the bias. I have recommended that people take the Harvard Implicit Bias Test because it tells you the degree of bias that you have. It's anonymous, it's online. All you have to do is pull it up and take it. I took it myself and was surprised at some of my answers, because I thought, after all my experiences, I could get along with anybody, and I do try to. But I find I have some biases, and I know other people do, most of us do. But because of slavery, what the African American population has gone through, harrowing experiences from slavery all the way up post-Reconstruction, Jim Crow, lynching, dogs. Even when the President of the United States was running, the things that were said about him, the threats that he gets, the disrespect that he's even experiencing now from people who say you lie in the Congress, to all the other things they're saying about him and not respecting his ideas, just automatically dismissing them. So racism is at the bottom of everything, although most people don't admit it. And somebody will always tell you one of my best friends is, and I can say the same thing. One of my best friends is white. You know, we have a wonderful relationship. But when you talk about school systems, politics, economics, contracting in the county, things like that, it's there. It's there, and you have to face it. So why did I become so involved? First of all, I like challenges. I love challenges. Don't tell me I can't do something because I am then going to do my best to try to do it. I didn't like what I was seeing. And my first attempt, I guess, we had one member of the school board, Pat Doherty, who recently passed. He lasted, I think, like 1 year because he said they were so disrespectful to him on the board that he just left. It was a long time, and then Roscoe Nix was on the Board of Education. And Roscoe, as you know, did a lot for the county. But still, it was only one, no elected official. And we said, okay, it's time for an elected official. So a group of us got together. It's called SURGE, the Coalition for Equitable Representation in Government. And we actually were a very small group, but we were pretty strategic in what we did and ended up having Ike Leggett elected to the council. And so we said, okay, so now we're in politics as well as education. Then I joined the Montgomery Housing Partnership because housing was an issue out here. And we built or remodeled or refurbished houses for people who really couldn't afford it. And then I liked the arts, so I was on what was formerly the Arts Council. And then the Boys and Girls Clubs, everything that I could find to help our people to move forward in this county, I did because I like the challenge and I like to make a difference. You know, when you start thinking of what's your purpose in life, and I think everybody goes through that. I remember asking my pastor one time, I don't know what I'm here for. You know, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I'll never forget that he said, what makes you think you're not doing it? Which really gave me pause. Said, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm still doing it. We have a group called 1977 2 Action Group. That's what it's called today. Art Williams is the chair of that group. It's called 1977-2 because there was a 1977-1. That group talked about the achievement gap. That was almost 40 years ago. 1977-2 is doing the same thing, 40 years later, talking about the achievement gap and what happens to the kids in the schools. So the NAACP, yes, I was in that. I'm in almost any organization that tries to help African Americans out here.
Why was it so important to be a part of this national group that, you know, had
NAACP? Because first of all, it had reputation, national reputation. It was the black organization that investigated and advocated for African Americans, and it just made sense that there was a local branch, and that branch existed when I came out here. Edith Throckmorton was, I think, the president of the NAACP when we moved out here. I didn't know too much about it at that time. I learned much more, to the extent that when I was the director of the Office of Human Rights, I started the Human Rights Hall of Fame because I found that people had forgotten people like Edith Throckmorton and a lot of the older ones. And that statue is in the hall of the Executive Office building now with brass plaques with names of people. We had an annual event recognizing them. I think it's now biennial because of the budget. But I understood that she would go out in her curlers and slippers to go to the jails to help the people. So it was the kind of organization that we needed, that was very effective, and that we wanted to support. So that's why we.
Just in Montgomery County, not counting all the other things you've done, but you were in the Office of Human Rights, as you said, worked in Family Resources, you were advisor to Gilchrist, you were the first Black woman elected to public office. When you look back at the progress, and I know there's more to be done, how do you feel knowing you've had a hand in it?
I feel very good. As I said, when you start thinking about your purpose in life, if you think you found one, there's the satisfaction of knowing that you've made some tiny difference. Certainly not anything huge, but some tiny difference. I mean, we've gone from, and I'll go way back to the one-room schoolhouse to schools that are named for Black individuals. We've gone from no elected officials to county executive and the president of the past president of the county council. The schools are integrated, although there are some problems there, and there's some resegregation going on. Last year, 2012, I did receive the highest honor that the county executive gives out for community service, and that was like the Oscars of community service. So, I mean, like, I feel blessed with the things that have happened to me. I know that God had a place in it and told me which way to go. And so I feel, yes, there's a lot to be done, and here I am. I told you when I was born, so you know how old I am. I'm still out here trying to do the best I can and to bring along the next generation, because those of us who worked very hard in the 80s and 90s are ourselves, 80s and 90s. And so I have been working with some of the younger people. We've got a great group of younger people coming up. Some of them ran for the last election. Not only one of them, I think, actually got through to Annapolis, but they're going to make it. They're moving along, and we're doing what we can to mentor some of them. That's the next step.
We talked about your experiences with some discrimination, and so those were some of the stories I wanted to come out. Were there any others that come to mind that you would want to share, or?
Well, I think I'd like to tell you why I even got involved in civil rights.
Oh, please.
Because,
since I was talking, say that sentence, and then go.
I think I'd like to tell you about how I got involved in civil rights, because I really was in computers. The very early computers, which were as big as this room, and that stood off the floor because you had to have all these pipes with water and things underneath of them to keep the room cool. The temperature had to be controlled. We programmed in binary, the zeros and ones. So to me, it's incredible that you've got something this small in your hand and you talk to it, and it does all the things that we did in this huge room. We used to say we could make the computer lie down and roll over because we knew exactly what was going on inside the computer. I don't think anybody knows that anymore except Silicon Valley or people like that. But that was fun, and I was enjoying it. But at the same time, the things were going on in the South. I had never been south of Washington, and I didn't really, I mean, you hear, but you're not really aware of what's going on. And then I went to the 1963 march, and I saw the people in their overalls with their donkeys, with their wagons, who had been through so much, who talked about the lynchings and the beatings. I knew about the students who sat in down in North Carolina. And I said, I can't do that. That's not me. I don't have the courage to stand in front of dogs and march and that sort of thing. but what can I do? What can I do? So I left the Census Bureau and went to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which had just been by law established. And I went into the research department. And from there, I'm happy to say I moved all the way up the ranks until I was in charge of the entire field operations. And I saw so much. I had to visit, well, at that time we had 48 offices. I had to visit all 48 offices. I was in one hotel and saw a Ku Klux Klan march down the street, the most frightening thing I think I have ever experienced, the white hoods and the what have you. I talked to people who had been through experiences that I couldn't even imagine. When I ran for the school board, I got a call from Ku Klux Klan out here telling me that I better not run. That was one time I really had to pray because you think you're putting your family in danger and what have you just for running for public office. But I had a wonderful campaign manager, Ruby Rubens, who stood by me through this entire thing. My entire team stood by me through all of that. And so that's how I became involved in civil rights. I wasn't brave enough. I went to see Selma, and all I could think of was, how could those people do that? How could they do it and accomplish what they accomplished? But I did what I could do. I did what I had the experience to do and the knowledge. And so that's how I entered civil rights. And I've been in it ever since because you see the need, and you see, but my appreciation for what the people of that era went through just increased exponentially. And so I can't leave it. I'm still fighting for civil rights, because even now we see what's happening in the Supreme Court. They're chipping away at the voting rights law, trying to say we don't need this anymore. They keep chipping away, and this is not the time to give up the fight. So that's why we're trying to make sure the young people know what's going on, what the history is, because a lot of them don't know. A lot of the young black people have no idea what people went through, whose shoulders they're standing on. And we want to make sure they know that so that they can carry on the fight because it's not over.